Hi, I'm Ed. Today we're going to make a very simple and delicious beef stew, the ultimate comfort food. So to make our beef stew, it's going to take several phases of cooking, so I'm going to go through that while I show you the ingredients. 2.5, 3 pounds of beef chuck pre-cut into cubes, a couple of onions, couple of carrots, 1.5 cups of chicken stock, 1.5 cups of red wine, some tomato paste, salt, pepper, thyme, some potatoes, and some carrots. So phase one is we're going to brown the beef, salt, pepper, some flour, coat it with a little flour, brown it on some olive oil. Phase two, we take out the beef, we put in carrots and the onions and the carrots, and we saute them down, brown the onions a little in a little red wine vinegar to help the browning. When that's done, we put the beef back in with those veggies, and we add our liquids, chicken stock and red wine. I use chicken stock. A lot of people use beef stock because it's a beef stew, but I think this makes it much lighter and more delicious. And the tomato paste. And then we let that cook for a couple of hours. Then, at the last hour, we put in some potatoes and carrots because we don't want them to be too mushy, so we're not going to cook them the entire time that the beef needs to cook. So here we go. Let's start with the beef. In order to prep our beef for browning, we're just going to do the usual. Let it come up to room temperature for a few minutes. Helps it cook more evenly. Some kosher salt, some fresh ground pepper, and some flour. And this you just do by eye. I got 4 tablespoons in there. I put half in at first, not enough. Put another bit. We don't want to have too much flour. It's just to add a little coating so that the beef browns nicely. Now, as soon as we're done with this, I'm going to need pretty much all 4 tablespoons. As soon as we're done with this and it's coated with the flour, we're going to brown it in batches in some olive oil. So here we go, right to the stovetop and a preheated casserole pot. Right, so I preheated our casserole. I'm going to put in a couple, 3 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil, and we can start putting in the meat right away. Probably have to do this in 2 batches depending on the size of your pan. You don't want to just chuck them all in and crowd them because then they won't brown, they'll just steam. So I'm just going to put 1 layer, see how much I get in here, and then after I cook that layer, just a couple minutes on each side. You're not trying to cook it all the way through. You're just trying to get a little brownness on this. Trying to get half of it in here at least. Right, then once we have the 2 batches browned, we put in our vegetables. So I put in my beef in 1 layer. I don't want to crowd it because I want it to brown. So let it go a couple minutes, just get a little brown on it. Flip it over, and when this batch is done, take it out, put the other batch in, brown that, and then empty the pan so that we can put in the carrots and the onions to brown. So here's our beef cooking away. It's browned on one side. I flipped it over, and just a couple minutes on the second side. So our first batch is done. So I'm going to add just a little bit more oil, get some fresh oil in there, and put the rest of our beef in 1 layer and brown this. Right, so while our meat is browning, you can probably hear it sizzling in the background, just finish slicing up our veggies that we're going to soften up. So I have 2 onions and a couple of carrots, which I'm going to slice into thin slices, and a few cloves of garlic to taste, minimum 4. I like a lot of garlic, so we put in 7. Slice up our carrot. So the onion goes in first, and we saute that until it gets brown with a little of the red wine vinegar, maybe 1/4 cup. And then we add the carrots until they're soft, and then right at the end we add the garlic and the rest of the liquids, and we put the beef back in. So as soon as the beef's done, all this goes in. Alright, our beef is browned, so the next step is a little more extra virgin olive oil. The nice thing is everything's cooked in 1 pan, so it makes it a lot easier. A little bit of olive oil in there, the pan's still hot. Onions in. Cook these down till they get soft and they start to brown. Then we add some red wine vinegar. A few tablespoons, maybe even 1/4 cup, just to help them caramelize a little bit. So we'll come back to that in a minute. Our onions have been in for about 5 minutes. You can see they're softened up and translucent. But to speed up the browning now, we're going to add that 1/4 cup of vinegar. And turn the heat up a little, and we'll come back when they're browned a little bit. Caramelized. We want to get the sugars out so they're nice and sweet. So our onions are pretty nicely starting to brown, caramelize a little bit. This is good enough. And then our 2 carrots sliced up. And I'm just going to let those heat through and soften up a little bit, maybe 3 to 5 minutes. Okay, now we're into the final phase here. Put our garlic in, just stir that around for just a few seconds. You can see we have a little bit of brown stuff in the bottom of the pot, but that's okay. That's awesome. That's going to be where a lot of the flavor is. So, going to add our thyme, a little bit of thyme, kind of to taste. I like thyme, so I'm going to put a bit in there. Going to add half a can of our tomato paste to be a little thickener to our liquids. Then we add our liquids, our 1.5 cups of chicken stock. You could use beef stock if you like that. It makes it obviously more beefy. I like it a little bit lighter tasting. Okay, and then 1.5 cups, the same amount, 1.5 cups of red wine. And back in with our beef, which we browned a while ago, with all its juices and everything. Ready? So we have just enough liquid, almost to cover it. And this is it. Now into the oven for about 1.5 hours, 2 hours. And while it's in there, we're going to cut up our other carrots, our finishing carrots and potatoes, and they go in for the last maybe half hour, 45 minutes, just so they cook through and don't get mushy. On with the lid and into a 350-degree oven. So we've had our stew in the oven for about a little over 1.5 hours at 350. Take it out. Looks good. What we're going to do now is add in the potatoes and carrots, about 1 pound of each. Just add those in. Stir it up a bit. Now this is a good time to check if it's a little too watery for you, or not too watery, I should say. If it's a little too thick, you can add some more liquid at this point, which I think I'm going to do because the potatoes are going to absorb some liquid. So I'm just going to add back a little extra of my preferred liquid, which is the chicken stock. Like I said, it will be absorbed pretty much by the potatoes in particular. Back in the oven for another hour at 350, and the potatoes will cook without getting mushy, and we'll be ready to serve it. So we've left our stew back in the oven, 350 for another hour, just to let the potatoes and the carrots cook through. And we just serve it up. I mean, it's already got the potatoes and veggies in there, so you can pretty much just serve it up in one bowl. You don't need anything. I like to serve this with a nice salad, and I like to finish it off with some fresh parsley. There you go, beef stew.